Hello there! Welcome to Scanning Key Productions. I'm Congrace Kokon. Let's get into the video. Today's video we're going to be asking the question of what if Russia became Muslim? Now this may sound ridiculous, but as we discussed in the last video, this came a lot closer to happening than one might have expected. So just for a little bit of context, in 986 AD, Vladimir the Great, who was the king of the Kievan Rus, who became, that was the predecessor to the Russian state. He wanted to make Russia's state religion a monotheistic religion. And so he almost did like a pick and mix kind of thing. So he had people representing different religions come to him and basically, try and convert him. And the first people that came to him were the Bulgarians on the Volga, who happened to be Muslim. So they obviously tried to convert him to Islam. However, don't take this the wrong way. Please, I don't want people to be offended by this. I'm just quoting what he said, okay? He said, hear me out, this is what he said, not my words. He said that Muslims have no joy, they're full of sorrow, and that the necessity for men to be circumcised and the prohibitions on pork and on alcohol were just complete no-goes, right? So as a result, he was like, yeah, we're not doing that. And actually, famously, he said the line of, drinking is the joy of the Rus. And this is kind of seen as the beginning of Russia's relationship with alcoholism. So that's kind of one of the things we're going to discuss in this video. So when it came to Islam, he's like, no. Then he looked at Judaism and, he considered it, but he said that the fact that the Jews had been kicked out of Jerusalem meant that it seemed evident that God had abandoned them. Again, his words, not mine, just chill, okay? So then he decided that our society is going to be governed by Christianity. But what kind of Christianity? So obviously in those days, this is kind of before you'd had like Protestant and Catholic and etc. So, and actually this a few years before the schism between Orthodoxy and Catholicism, but already you could kind of see differences in how the churches kind of like operated and stuff. So to the west of them, you had, places in Germany and in Scandinavia, and the churches there, even back then, were quite bland when compared to some of the other ones. So not disrespecting Protestants here, but Protestant churches and Catholic churches, Catholic churches look very, very pretty in comparison to Protestant churches. And then when you compare Protestant and Catholic to Orthodox churches, like Orthodox churches, just, there's no comparison. They're just much more beautiful, right? And this is one of the things that kind of influenced him, because he was like, these churches that they have in Germany, they kind of look kind of bland and a bit dull. So he sent emissaries to Constantinople, which is modern day Istanbul, and the I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation of this, the Hagia Sophia, which is the big mosque there, which used to be an Orthodox church at the heart of the Byzantine Empire. And his emissaries, when they returned, said, we didn't know whether we were in heaven or on earth, and that the beauty that we saw there, we don't know there's no words to describe the beauty that we saw there. And so because of the beauty of the Orthodox churches, that's why Russia today is Orthodox Christian. However, let's for argument's sake say that he wanted to make Russia Muslim. How would that have affected not just Russian society, but how would that have affected geopolitics throughout the rest of Europe and the rest of that region? So that's what we're going to look into in this video. So the first part of it's going to be looking at the socio-economic impacts within Russia itself on like them being teetotal. So we're not going to necessarily look at like the pork aspect and the circumcision aspect. We're going to be looking at the aspect of them being teetotal because Russia itself, it has a reputation obviously for alcoholism. It's a big part of like their culture, like it's a big part of the stereotypes that people have for Russians. So if you remove that and all the kind of like societal effects of it, how would Russia be different today? And on top of that, we're going to be looking at the impact that this would have had geopolitically within Europe and that whole region. But before we do any of that, don't forget to hit the like button. We're trying to get to 20 likes per video. We're doing relatively well, but all our videos, they're getting to about 10 likes. We kind of, want to kind of break that mold. At very least 15. We just try and get to 20, because then it boosts it so that more people see it. Then more people see the channel. Then more people see the other great videos. And also, don't forget, obviously, check out some of the other videos as well. Subscribe if you haven't, so you stay posted for all the new videos we've got planned. And anyway, that's enough of the plug. Let's get into the video. So indeed, drinking has been the joy of the Rus for many, many centuries because obviously it's quite easy to produce alcohol. In many cases, it was safer to drink than water because obviously you had pollutants in the river and stuff, and so people were much less likely to get sick from drinking alcohol. And just to give an idea of just how prolific it was, 40% of all tax revenue that went to the government in 1860 came from alcohol production. Now, what the Russian Tsars realised very early on is that if you took control and created a state monopoly of the production of alcohol, you would never ever end up running out of profits, right? And also, it has a good side effect of keeping the peasantry down because people are drunk all the time. They're not going to be like trying to start a revolution, or so the thinking was. And this practice goes back all the way to Ivan the Terrible, who was the first ruler of Russia to monopolize the production of alcohol. So much so that by 1648, 1/3 of all Russian men were in debt to the government over this. And by 1909, the average Russian drank 11 bottles of vodka per capita per year. So yeah, so that just gives you kind of an idea of just how prolific it was. So when the Bolsheviks took power in Russia, and definitely check out our previous video on what if the Russian Revolution never happened for a bit more context on that. When the Bolsheviks took power, they tried to push for an anti-alcoholism agenda. They tried to really discourage people from drinking, because they thought that the new Soviet man as such shouldn't be an alcoholic. They should be, clear mind and clear body and stuff, and get on with being a productive citizen. However, for Stalin, when he came to power, he recognized the same thing of what the Tsars had recognized, which was that A, it was a good source of tax revenue, and B, it was a good way of keeping people down, because obviously if people are drunk, they're not going to be rebelling. So as a result, once again, the production of alcohol became a state monopoly. And so in the days of the Soviet Union, alcoholism was even more rampant because the state had a vested interest in having people drink more and more, so then obviously they can get more tax revenue. And actually some of the bottles that were produced there, they weren't sealable. So once you opened a bottle, you basically had to down it and stuff. So this encouraged more and more alcoholism. And when Gorbachev came to power as the last premier of the Soviet Union, he tried to really clamp down on alcoholism once again. So he almost imposed a kind of partial prohibition in a way. So there were severe restrictions on the sale of alcohol, and there were severe penalties for public drunkenness. So yeah, he really tried to clamp down on it, had education program and stuff. And this worked. This did manage to get the alcoholism in Russia down. However, he was very unpopular for this. So this is yet another reason why Gorbachev is now seen in Russia as being a very unpopular person. However, Gorbachev was onto something, because it's estimated that since 1987, there have been an extra 3 million deaths in Russia as a result of alcoholism. And by 1985, it was estimated that $8 billion each year will be lost in terms of productivity due to alcoholism. And so even today, you find big parts of Russia, being really negatively affected. And so just to give some idea on this, the Lancet, which is a medical journal, they went to some Siberian industrial towns, and they found that 52% of all deaths that took place between people aged 15 to 54 were from alcohol. And that in Russia today, anywhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of all violent crime is associated to alcohol. So this is murder, this is domestic violence, this is all manner of things, right? Like nearly all the fights that end up happening, someone ends up being highly intoxicated. And Russia, as of 2016, still had a situation in which, on average, the average adult in Russia drank 14 litres of vodka a year. Now you say, okay, that's obviously quite a lot. However, this is after a concerted campaign by the Putin government to try and reduce alcoholism. So before, in 2011, it was 16 litres per person. Russia also happens to have one of the highest suicide rates in the world. And so in the late 90s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, it was estimated that the suicide rate was 40 for every 100,000 people. So for every 100,000 people, 40 of them would commit suicide. Now, that figure has dropped down slightly to 27 for every 100,000 people, but that's still one of the highest in the world by quite a margin. And it's estimated again that about half of those who commit suicide in Russia again, it's linked to alcoholism. Never mind the fact that, you know, domestic violence in Russia is, again, one of the highest in the whole world, and for some unknown reason, the Putin government, like the other year, decriminalized domestic violence. It's already ridiculously high, and then they decriminalized it, and surprise, surprise, boom, it went up, right? Because people thought, right, we can do what we want to our wives and or to our girlfriends, and like the government's not going to get involved. So, yeah, that's a great idea, isn't it? What kind of, yeah. And again, a lot of those who will be committing acts of violence against their spouses or girlfriends, it's going to be as a result of being under the influence of alcohol. And so if Russia was teetotal, how much better would things be? You know, you'd have higher life expectancy, you'd probably have much less violence, you'd have, you know, a healthier economy, you'd have much less depression, much less mental health issues, much less, you know, domestic violence, murder, everything, right? Never mind all the sick days and the fall in productivity that causes as well. So in many ways, Russian society, you know, people make jokes about it and go, oh yeah, but at the end of the day, it's, you know, alcoholism is not good. And I think that not necessarily going teetotal, like kind of, you know, but at least Russia is making steps towards trying to deal with this issue. There was even the idea floated the other year of raising the drinking age from 18 to 21. So they are trying to do some things now. However, it's very much ingrained within the culture, and it's something which people are having to kind of like get out of. So now that we've dealt with the societal issues that alcohol causes in Russia, we're going to now look at the wider geopolitical impact of what if Russia had been Muslim, right? So what we have to understand is that people before the modern era like were very much influenced by, you know, it wasn't politics, it wasn't left versus right, it was religion, right? So this is the era of the crusades, this is the era of like holy wars and everything. So Russia being Muslim, especially in this time, would have been huge. So the way that Europeans felt at that point was that Christianity was under siege. So you had the Muslim empires, which stretched across like North Africa and into Spain, and were, you know, starting to come into Anatolia, and eventually would end up taking over with regard to the Ottomans. Yeah, so it was seen as the enemy are at the gates as such, right? And we see this in the siege of Vienna, for instance, in 1683, where the Turks are literally on the gates of Vienna and about to storm into the rest of Europe. So imagine how Europe would have felt if you'd had not just Muslims from the south, but also Muslims coming directly from the east. You know, they would have felt even more like besieged. We always think, for instance, about the crusades that took place in the Middle East, but there were also many crusades that took place in the Baltic regions against the, well, at that point they were pagans, like kind of like in Russia. And I don't mean that kind of pagan for the people in the UK. I'm talking about that kind of pagans. I mean like non-believers in things. Okay, so don't mean that. So again, how would this have changed the geopolitics of many states like in Eastern and Central Europe? So for instance, Austria, Prussia and Sweden would have been the kind of bulwarks, yeah, like kind of for Christianity. And yeah, they were felt very, very much besieged. Already in our timeline, the Russians are kind of seen as European, but not really European. You know, they're seen as a little bit too Asiatic. And so if they were Muslim, then there would be even more of this kind of dissociation, because they would have been seen very much as the other, if that makes sense. Russian culture today would be far more like that of Central Asia than it is of Eastern Europe. So our whole perception of Russia would be very much changed, and the perception of Russia that Russian people have would again be very much different, be very much orientated further towards the east. Also, something to note is that, you know, as a result of Russia being Orthodox Christian, when the Ottomans took Constantinople, this was the kind of like driving geopolitical interest of the Russian state, for about 500 years. And this is something we covered in our previous video of what if the Crimean War never happened. So, you know, there probably would have been no Crimean War as it happened in this timeline, because you would have had a Muslim Russia competing with a Muslim Ottoman Empire. So, you know, so all the kind of tension between Russia and Turkey, I'm not saying that there would have been none at all, but there probably would have been much less than there actually was in our current timeline. Also, something to note as well is that the way that Muslims treated Jews, for instance, was different from many Christians in the region. So many of the pogroms that took place in the 19th and 20th century, they were, obviously many Christian people in Russia who saw the Jews as Christ killers. It's not to say that Jews never experienced persecution. We've covered that in our video about the origins of the Holocaust, so definitely give that a check out as well. But it's much, much less. And so would you have had the large scale persecution of Jews to the point of them having to flee mainly to like Britain and to America? Probably not. And then if that didn't happen, would there be as many Jews in America today? And so think of all the influential Jewish Americans whose ancestors fled from the Tsars. And finally, we have to ask the question of how likely would it have been if Russia had actually ended up going down the road of communism? It's not to say that there was no countries which became communist which had been Muslim, but it is much less likely. The fact that in Islam there is a big stigma against atheism, having all these people who are communists, probably would have been a much less likely thing. I think that people there probably would have been a lot less tolerant to it, and therefore they're probably the risk of Russia becoming communist was probably much less if this time had happened. But obviously so many things would have changed. We're talking about a period of like over 1,000 years. One of my friends actually asked me this about like what is the kind of outward limit of how far you would do alternative histories, and I think this is probably one of the like furthest I'll go back, because literally so many things happen, so many different things, like so many, you can't even, it's difficult to get your head around about just how different the whole world would be, not just Russia but like literally the whole world. And so if you do any of these kind of timelines, the butterfly effects past a certain point gets really ridiculous. This is why for the most part this channel, if we've done alternative history, we tended to focus on things happening a few years after the events, and not try to get too far out there. And the problem with this timeline is, as interesting as it is, and as interesting as a thought experiment is, and that's why I covered it, because I thought that it's something to really think about. But it's so divergent from the current timeline, and it spans so many different centuries that I think at this point here I kind of have to stop the timeline. However, the next video is going to be on something which is a bit more succinct and a bit more modern, which is going to be on what if Germany never unified. So we're going to be looking at 3 different years within this. We're going to be looking at 1866, which was the Austria-Prussian War, which, that was the big fight about who would be the dominant power and, unify the Germans. Then we're going to be looking at 1871, and what if Prussia wasn't able to unify all the German states which later became Germany. And then we're going to be looking at 1990. So we're going to be looking at what if West Germany and East Germany at the end of the Cold War never unified. And so hopefully for the people who are a bit like, oh, this is, they want a bit more realistic timelines and a bit more something that they can kind of look at, and something, first of all, that's a bit more modern as well. Yes, we're going to be doing that. So if you enjoyed this video, definitely hit the like button, share with your friends, check out some of our other videos as well. We go into a lot of depth with a lot of things, and have a great day, and bye.